Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session, Anatomy of the Scripted Format. Here is our moderator, President, Fluent Media Group, Raul Mateo.
Thank you. Welcome. The purpose of this panel today, as we put it together, is not necessarily to have the discussion that we seem to have every year at NATPE as to whether the format business is a good business or a bad business. It's a very good business. Everyone here on stage spends an awful long time in their daily lives dealing with formats, and there are some great successes in that business. So we don't necessarily want to get into discussion as to why they work, why they don't work. But we sort of wanted to give everybody here a little bit of an insight in terms of how these deals are structured, why they work for studios, and maybe what some of the biggest roadblocks are to getting your scripted or your format deals, not just scripted, but format deal done. So I want to get started by introducing everybody on the panel. For starters, I want to apologize on behalf of Marcus Wiley from Fox Network. Unfortunately, they're in the middle of picking up pilots at the network, and things got a little crazy in LA, and he could not join us, so he wishes he could be here. But at the opposite end of the stage, that handsome fellow over there is Tibble Whitney. He's the head of business affairs of International Creative Management, one of the top talent agencies in LA. Prior to coming over to ICM, he was a senior member of the business affairs department at the William Morris Agency, where we first met. Next to him is Diego Suarez, who's senior vice president of international at Fox Television Studios. He is the person at the studio who has an eye towards the world, for a lack of a better example, and producing television shows from all over the place. Diego and I do a lot of business together. I'm currently working on the development of one of the shows he created in Argentina called Mitos, which we hope is something we're going to be bringing here to the States very soon. Diego is originally from Argentina, but has also, prior to coming to the States, lived in Italy and Spain and where else?
Portugal.
Yeah. So he's a citizen of the world. And then immediately to my right is the executive vice president of ABC Studios and the person in charge of business affairs at the studio and everything that has to do with all the deals that get made for all of the shows that they produce, whether they're for ABC or for some other networks. And Howard is like every girlfriend I had in high school. No matter what I ask for, he always says no.
Thanks.
Yeah, he's
Thank you.
You know he's that guy. But
so not true.
Yeah. So I think what I wanted to get started is, as I'm out talking to the international marketplace, talking about bringing maybe some of their ideas here, there seems to be great confusion about really what's the difference between a studio and a network. Most shows in the States have both the involvement of a studio and a network. I would say every show pretty much does. And it's very often that I'm talking to a rights owner, wherever it may be, and they say, you know, Raul, we want you involved in this thing, but we can't have you be involved in Fox because, you know, I know Diego, and Diego's at Fox, but I always say, do you know the difference between what Diego does and what his network might do, or the network that is owned by his company? So I wanted to have you two guys maybe get started and sort of talk a little bit about what the role of the studio is as it pertains to the acquisition of a format and how it relates to a network sale.
Well, I think probably one of the first questions that anybody who's a format owner needs to answer is, where are you going to take it in the American broadcast marketplace? And that first question will be answered by where will you have the greatest success? And you're going to have a very good understanding of the American marketplace in order to answer that question, and that's where probably people like Raul come into play, people like Tibble come into play, who have a very good understanding, if you don't yourself have that understanding, because there's a significant difference between studios and networks, and the marketplace the landscape has become a little confused with the vertical integration that has occurred over the years. So now you have, in essence, the four major broadcast networks all have affiliated studios, and then you have two major studios that are unaffiliated, pretty much unaffiliated with networks, Sony and Warner Brothers. So you have Fox and 20th Century Fox and FTVS, part of the Fox group. You have us and ABC. You've got CBS and CBS Television Studios. And you have NBC and whatever they're calling their studio, UMS.
Universal. Check in next week.
Yeah, check in next week. Comcast Studios, I don't know. So there is a distinction. If you have a project that you think is best suited for the air of ABC, and really only ABC, then chances are maybe a good move is in fact to go to ABC first. On the other hand, if it could be a number of different studios, maybe primarily ABC, but also good for CBS or NBC, and perhaps there's also some talent that we have as a studio that you'd like to be connected with, then probably the right move is going to be to go to ABC Studios first, and then have us pitch to ABC, and if ABC, for whatever reason, doesn't do it, we can take it out to the other networks. But it is a significant question first question to be asked.
And Diego, as a creative, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a big confusion about, sometimes people think that you are Fox Television Studios, so they have a show that they think is going to be good at Fox, so they think it's done. No. We as a studio, we're free to go to other networks, to other broadcasters. Actually, two of our most successful shows are Burn Notice and White Collar, that are on USA Network and not on FX. That should be a natural place for us to be. This is a good thing about the American market. And this is a good thing about going to a studio. I mean, if you don't have a clue where your show, or what's the best fit for your show in the U.S. marketplace, I think the best thing you can do is go to a studio that is open to work with any other network than the affiliate.
The other thing about studios, by the way, I think to a greater degree than networks, they have the ability to help you hone your pitch and make it ready to go to networks. If your pitch really needs work, really needs adaptation so that it has the best shot of being sold to a studio, definitely go to someone like Diego first.
We as a studio, we have the chance to, our job is to know what the networks are looking for, who are the writers they want to be in business with. So if we know your project could be a good show for that network with this writer and this other producer, so our job is usually with an agent to do a package, to go and do the redevelopment of the show that already exists, but for the American market, for sure, is going to need a lot of job.
And I think the follow-up to that, because I think it's confusion about this as well, as a rights owner that has a format, if you're lucky to get someone who wants to buy it, your deal is not going to be with a network. Your deal is going to be with the studio. So you would actually negotiate your deal with a studio, and then the studio negotiates with the network, the licensing deal for that project. So it's important to know that, because there is a difference there in terms of how you would go about doing that. The other thing that I encounter all the time, and I've got programming agreements with people from all over the world, is how deals are negotiated. For an American studio, an American network, there's a rhyme or reason, and there's a schedule in terms of when pitching happens, when negotiating happens, when packaging happens, when writing happens, when pilots get made. And the business here moves very quick. If I am going to ABC and I'm pitching a show, I'm going to get an answer pretty quickly whether they want it or not. And Howard and I can negotiate a deal in a week. And we put everything on the table and we agree or we don't agree. But there's a certain rhythm that happens. And I think one of the issues that we encounter with the international marketplace is that it takes an awful long time to make a format deal. And a lot of that is cultural in terms of how some of these companies work. But there's a sense that, first you negotiate the option deal, and then when you agree an agreement in that, then you begin talking about some other issues, then you sort of start negotiating other parts, and then you renegotiate what you agreed to in the first place. And I have to sense, Howard, and Tibble, you can comment on this as well, it's extremely frustrating for you guys, oftentimes when you're dealing with international suppliers that don't understand what your needs are. Talk a little bit about timing and the importance to be able to get things done quickly.
Well, I think right from the get-go, if you're moving to a network and then back down, laying it off at a studio, you're already having a little bit of a disconnect, I think, because your client, the foreign format holder, is going to have certain expectations. When you set it up with a studio, you're negotiating really the inside numbers right away. And it's, I think, very, very important to get all of the different issues, holdbacks, what level of participation they're going to want to have in the project, these are issues that have to be vetted and come out up front. The stress and anxiety induced in friends like Howard when these come out after the fact, when all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, we have to have a holdback in Germany, or oh yeah, we've already pre-sold China. These are ways that the studio is monetizing the asset, and as representatives of the client, of the format holder, it is extraordinarily difficult from time to time to smooth that over and can actually kill projects.
But not only that, I mean, so back to the timing for a second. For the most part, 90 to 95% of all programs are geared for pickups in May, which means pilot season, which is right now, which means development window, which is probably starting in July, and for most networks in drama anyways, are pretty much closed by August. So if you don't have that project set up and completely negotiated in that summertime time frame, chances are you're going to miss this pilot season, and potentially you'll have a network say, either we've lost our interest, so we're not interested at all, or they're going to say, you know what, now guys, you have to roll it a whole other year, and let's try to get it into the queue for next year. So that's, you know, the timing is critical.
And if you roll it over, you still run the risk that they lose interest, so there's a new executive in charge at that point.
The other thing is on the issue of the deal. You know, we can, and all of us who negotiate deals can negotiate the basics of any deal in less than a week, in a couple of days. But there's almost no deal point, there's almost no detail too small on a format deal for it not to be negotiated before you close the deal. That's exactly right, Tybalt. If we have a situation where we've spent a week negotiating the basic stuff, do they get executive producer credit? What's the fee? What's the format option? What's the purchase price and all of that? And then at the end, oh, by the way, we just found out there's a holdback in Germany. It could literally be fatal to the deal.
Right.
And I guess we'll talk about this probably right now, that the issue of distribution holdbacks, the import and export, you know, our ability, Diego's ability to export the Americanized version around the world is critical, because at the international marketplace, to a great degree, is how at least American dramas continue to be monetized. And that doesn't mean that an American network is going to look at it the same way.
Let me interrupt you there, because I think maybe we should get into explaining the business in terms of the importance and how you really are deficit financing these programs that are going on the air. The network is only paying for a small percentage of your production cost. You might spend $5 million on a pilot. You might be spending $3-4 million on a drama.
Let's hope it's not that high.
Not high, but and the network is only picking, what, a third of that cost sometimes, whatever it may be?
You know, these days in primetime network, it's probably a little more than 50% of the cost. So that's a significant monetary outlay by a studio. We've got to know that we have a complete latitude in the international marketplace to be able to sell wherever we can.
And we as studios, we're banks, actually. Our job is being a bank. I mean, we finance development and risk, and we finance deficit. That's our business. So if you have holdbacks in Western Europe, and I can monetize my show in the international distribution in a market in which, you know, home video is dying, we're not going to have a deal. I mean, there's no deal.
Yeah, well, that means, I mean, if you give your rights to a broadcaster in England or Italy or France, specifically the bigger markets and the biggest issues,
Germany,
and you've given that broadcaster overseas the ability to block any other version of that program from entering to your country, Mr. ABC here is all of a sudden going to say, well, wait a minute, Germany generates for me X millions of dollars over the life of the show. All of a sudden those economics change. And then the reason to buy your format sort of go out the window.
But it doesn't even necessarily need to be even a holdback. I mean, I've had instances where you just have a right of first refusal or something. And that's enough to chill it and scare the studio sufficiently that if they're penciling out their numbers, it starts not to make sense.
If it's in any one of the major markets, if there's a first negotiation, last refusal, and our international sales guys say that's going to significantly dampen our ability to monetize that market, you do run the risk that we may blow the deal just on that very.
And on top of that, usually those markets have output deals with your distributors.
Yep.
So, and that's a big problem too.
Because you're going to have probably three different versions of the same thing in any territory. You have the original version, let's say the Colombian Ugly Betty.
Right.
You might have the
US Hispanic.
The Hispanic version. You may have if it's in Italy, the Italian original version of Ugly Betty, and then you're going to have the American dubbed version of Ugly Betty. And if you're I don't want to pick on RCN, but if you're RCN, who was the licensor of our Ugly Betty, you need to make sure that you understand that when the Americans come in, they're going to want a free landscape, a clear landscape. So you can't really give exclusivity in any other of those format licenses.
Yeah, and obviously if there's some pre-existing deals that predated, I think the best policy if you're a rights owner is to be very upfront about that from the beginning. You know, wasting a studio's or a network's time, you know, can only backfire if ultimately you can't close that deal. And I think those have become some of the biggest issues we've had in the past. I mean, we've had cases where a show got picked up and put on the air, and then your international guys start to distribute it, and I get a call saying, wait a minute, we have an issue in wherever it may be, and that's even a bigger problem because, you know, once you get that show made and sold, then you know.
It also means if you're a licensor in any one of these other countries, good record keeping, good contracts, having great attention to detail is going to be critically important because guys like Raul and Tybalt are going to need that information, and you need to have it at your fingertips so that they can convey the issues to us right away.
One of the things that I wanted to talk, and part of the reason I invited Tybalt, is sort of the role of an agent, and if it's not an agent, a very good attorney who sort of knows what they're doing, because I got to imagine, Howard and Diego, when you're negotiating with somebody who doesn't know the parameters of how U.S. deals are made, it can be extremely frustrating when you're being asked for things that there's no way you can do. So, you know, in my experience as a former agent, you know, there's a lot of good agents, but not every agent knows the international marketplace, nor do they care about the formats. And that's a tricky thing when you're selecting somebody to represent your interests, because in many cases, many agencies care more about their writer client who's ultimately going to produce it, or the production entity that's going to produce it, than the actual international show. Many times an international show is just a piece of content that they need to feed a pipeline. But obviously if you're a rights owner, that's your baby, that's your most important property, and you want somebody representing your interests to the fullest. But I would imagine that, you know, Howard, you would much rather get a call from Tybalt than from somebody in some part of the world who doesn't understand how you do business. And so let's talk a little bit about the role of the agency, Tybalt, and what is it that you guys really do and your importance in the process.
Well, I think, you know, in addition to obviously trying to sell the product, you're also you're acting as counsel in a way. You're trying to advise them of what's realistic and what's not realistic as far as a deal. You know, certain things like the level of participation, the underlying scripts, what say they are going to have in the creative process. These are all different things that need to be vetted and addressed. More often than not, in scripted television especially, the showrunner is the king. The showrunner who's going to be writing and running is going to take the general idea and craft their own image from it. And for some format holders, that's a difficult thing to understand. That, hey, you mean it's going to be completely different than what, you know, the underlying project actually was? Because in Colombia, this was extraordinarily successful. You know, why are you changing it? Well, because it's an American market, and we have an American showrunner who's going to change it.
Let me just interrupt you a second. The showrunner, that term of showrunner, for those of you who may not understand, it's such a common term. It's the actual writer, the person who's going to be the executive producer and is going to be creating the American version. When we talk about showrunner, that's who that is.
Right. Then as far as the actual deal making goes, you know, more often than not, unfortunately, you're talking about really, you know, the option price. Because at the end of the day, they aren't going to purchase something that they aren't going forward with. Now, you always hope that every single one of these projects is going to be successful and the studio is going to pull the trigger and buy it. But the truth is chances are they're just going to option it for, you know, a year-long period, give or take, and decide then. So a lot of these just go away after a year. They just, you know, it goes into development or, you know, and doesn't really go any further than that. Well, you want the project back. And little things like negotiating and making sure you have some type of reversion provision, making sure that if this thing does go forward a little bit and maybe it goes to pilot but doesn't go to series, well, it's still a valuable asset. You still want it back. So it's the agents and the agencies can help negotiate some of the, the inside numbers are easy. I want $15,000 an episode for my EP. I want $2,500, for life as a royalty. It's the back end participation.
So, but why don't you start from the beginning and
Okay.
maybe explain to everybody here what the pillars of your typical format deal are.
The core deal will be the basic core deal, and Howard, jump in if I leave something out, is you've got an option against a purchase price. The purchase price will be set by the market. It can be, $50,000, $100,000, $250,000, and
10.
then or 10. I like to think of it a little
Right.
bit higher. The option will be kind of a percentage against that purchase price, typically. So you'll have, if it's, let's just make the numbers easy, a $50,000 purchase price, it'll be $5,000 option, which will be applicable in case they go forward for a one-year option. Inevitably, the studio will want a right to extend that option for perhaps another $5,000. That one will not be applicable. You'll negotiate, or at least you try to negotiate, having the principals of the underlying format holder to become some type of producerial role, hopefully EPs on the show. So they'll have an EP fee. You can have a lock for at least, I like to lock them for life, but other people will disagree. You'll want a royalty. The difference between the two is if you have an EP fee, only while you're rendering services as the executive producer will you be paid that EP fee, whereas the royalty lasts for life.
And sometimes those two fees are combined into one as well.
Well, especially if you lock them for life, because
Right.
then you're really talking about one kind of pool of money. You'll also want to have some type of profit participation in the show. And that can range from a couple points to maybe up to even 10, 15 points, depending on how much leverage you actually have. And those points in the beginning are really worth nothing, but over time, in the success of a show, of a Betty or of an Office, you're looking at millions of dollars. That's real money,
Maybe
real
The Office.
big money.
The Office.
There are all other things that you can try to negotiate: series sales bonus, rerun payments, performance bonuses.
And then the sticky ones are the ones that we sort of referred to, which is the distribution issues, the holdbacks, if there are any. Reversion is a huge issue. We're going to be resisting reversion, although we certainly understand if an option lapses, nothing happens. If we purchase it, I'm not sure we're so excited about reversion. There are certain people who insist for some high-level companies that something must revert at some point.
Absolutely.
In fact, we refer to that as the Lipstone provision. Because and I certainly understand it from the format rights holder's perspective, but you have to also understand from the studio's perspective. If we've put years of deficits into something, we may not want it to revert. We always refer back to something like Star Trek, which literally went for 67 episodes and then was out. You can't have a situation where we create the goodwill in America and then find ourselves a few years later that there's a movie being developed of that particular project and we have no involvement in it. That's just not acceptable. So these kinds of conversations take a great deal of time. We can, and it is actually risky for us because as a studio, we do have that time frame, and I've got my creative executives, people like Diego, who are saying to me, I've got the writer's ready to get going, how you doing on the deal? And I'm saying, well, we're still in this, we're kind of nowhere on issues of reversion. They haven't gotten back to us on the issues of distribution holdbacks. And you're saying, but the writer's got to start writing or else we're going to miss this pilot season. And that's when we have a discussion of where we see the risks.
Yeah.
Do we, because you're probably going to have a writer that's going to be paid somewhere between, I don't know, $100,000 and could be a multiple of that, $200,000-$300,000. Do we want to risk that amount of money without understanding that they're knowing one way or the other whether we're actually going to be able to close a deal? And those are the kinds of risks we assess on a regular basis. That's part of our job, because at the end of the day, we do want this project to go forward, and we hope that all the pieces fit together in time for it to be delivered to the network for pilot consideration. Once it's gone to the network, you need to have all your deal pieces in place, or else the project's not going to get ordered?
I'm a format guy, and I like to think I'm a creative producer and all these things, but at the end of the day, the writer is king in Hollywood. So your formats, our formats, are going to require a writer that network is extremely excited about. And I can't emphasize enough, and there's a lot of moving parts, I believe, in the U.S. marketplace that sort of require the ability to sort of close a deal quickly. Because one thing is getting your deal done, as Howard said, but then you got to lock in that writer. And writers, if they're good, have a lot of options. They have a lot of people pitching them ideas. They have their own original ideas. They've got networks and studios telling them they want them to do X, Y, and Z. And you want to be able to latch on to the best possible writer, because if you don't, your show's not going to go anywhere. And Diego, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, you and I are working on a show right now which is brilliant, which we pitched to the networks, we pitched to your network, everybody loves, and everybody said to us, who's the writer? You know, and talk a little bit more about how that plays into your timing.
Well, actually, the writer thing is a big issue for American networks. I mean, if we want to attach American writers, that doesn't mean that your show is not good enough. The thing is that in a risky marketplace like the television market in the United States, there are all the players trust a group of writers. Those are the writers they trust, and they think they can deliver what you are promising your show is going to be. So you have to you have to have one of those writers on your show. And as you say, that writer is going to be the showrunner. That writer is going to change a lot of things of your format. But why we are still looking forward for formats? Because it's a good way to go to the network and work on the base of something that is already have been done. Say, this is the show. We have this writer that was on Parks and Recreation and 30 Rock, and he has a great take for comedy, and his point of view on this show is this one. The guy explains to the network his point of view, his take on that show that already exists, and then you have a development deal with the network. And this guy is going to write a completely new show. I think that happened with Betty, right?
Yeah.
Betty's nothing to do with the Colombian version.
Yeah, very little.
It's a completely different show.
And it goes back, I think, also to the role of the agency as well. Not only necessarily will the studio perhaps steer you towards a writer, but the good part about an agency is you've got a huge stable, potentially, of showrunners. So the format can come into the agency, and the agency, if it's doing its job correctly, is truly packaging the project, taking the idea, the underlying concept, delivering it to hopefully one of its production companies or one of its showrunners, and bringing all of that together to an ABC or to a Fox or whoever, and saying, look, this is what we can bring you. Not only this showrunner, but excuse me, an underlying format that has it's a proven commodity. Yeah. It's been on the air for 5 years in Germany, or it's been on the air for 3 seasons, and it's a huge hit in Colombia.
Huge numbers in 1849.
Right. Exactly.
And in the U.S., writers in the television market, writers are stars. There is an old joke in the feature films market that says that the blonde actress was so stupid that she slept with a screenwriter. She was trying to get power into the film, and in television, it's just the opposite. I mean, in the feature films market, the screenwriter is just a piece in the whole thing. I mean, the director is a star. In the television market, the writer is a star. The showrunner is the guy the networks trust. This is the guy. When you are shooting 13 or maybe 24 episodes per season, the director is a guy that is going to change one episode to the following one. It's a guy that is more an executor of the showrunner vision. So that's the guy you have to trust. That's the guy. And those guys, as Raul said, are very busy. I mean, if you have the writer, if you have the project, close the deal, because you are going to probably have a big chance to have your show on air in the United States.
And it keeps going back to timing. And I think having realistic expectations when you're closing your deals and knowing what you're asking for and what the parameters are for deals so you can move quickly. And we talk about timing back and forth. This is something that happened to Diego and I this year. There's a project we're working on which we solidified an unbelievable writer, a writer that everybody wanted to be in business with. Loved our project. We had multiple meetings. We knew exactly what our take was going to be. We had actually set up pitch meetings at the networks that we wanted to be in business with. 3 days prior to our pitch meeting, I get a call saying my writer is no longer available because Steven Spielberg had called him about a show Steven Spielberg wanted to do.
Who?
And I'm no Steven Spielberg.
He's a new guy. He's a new and upcoming talent.
And I understood, but I kept kicking myself. If we could have been a week earlier in the process, maybe Steven Spielberg never makes that call, and we probably have already sold that show. And those are the things that happen. And you got to understand, a writer is going to go where he or she feels that the best is going to be.
So let me ask a question to you.
Yeah.
If a writer is that important, how are you able to sell formats unattached to writers?
How am I?
Because you've done it.
Yeah, no,
You sold it to us.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes formats are so good that they sell themselves. And I think what I'm good at, I watch a lot, and I know how to sort of speak your language and sort of come in and have a discussion about how it could work. But there are formats that you absolutely did the writer in front, and I think that's another interesting topic. There are things that sell themselves, like Ugly Betty or Anti-Mafia Squad, which I'm doing with you guys. But there are some things that are so particular that you got to go in with the vision of that writer. But either way, whether I sell it to you independently or not, we're going to need that writer. In our case, on Anti-Mafia Squad, we took a long time to get the deal done. We couldn't agree on the right writer, so we've decided to sort of postpone it and develop it now, starting in the new year. And maybe it was a good decision, maybe it was a bad decision. I guess we don't know until we sort of get there. But I think as we're getting to the point of the question and answer session, there really are no right or wrong answer. I mean, it's a fluid business. It changes every day. But being prepared and I think knowing what to expect and what the landscape is the best possible way to do it. So if you're a rights holder or you're a producer that has access to formats, the good news is that the appetite is so tremendous in Hollywood. There's so many networks, and with cable networks every day expanding their original programming appetite, they need material. And I think the networks and the studios are extremely opening to hearing a show no matter where it's from. If they think it can be a difference maker for them, they will buy it from you. The question is, you've got to be smart about it, and you've got to have the right deal to get these guys to sort of bite on it and say, we want to be your partners. I guess before we turn it over to questions, if anybody has a question, I don't know if anybody else wants to add something that we didn't discuss or they think it's relevant.
I don't think so. I mean, the last thing I would say is that, and you've heard it, I think, from all of us, that there's a level of participation that certain format holders are going to want to have in the American version of the show. And it is a difficult conversation at times to let them know that, notwithstanding this hugely successful show that they have on their foreign market, it's not going to be the exact same. And that their level of participation, they might want it, they might want to be involved, but the American studio may want to limit that a little bit, actually, rather than encourage it. And that could be a difficult ego.
99% of the time, we're really not going to want creative involvement. Right. And sometimes that's also for practical reasons, not just for creative reasons. It's mostly fueled by the creative, but on the practical side, very often you have a format rights holder who's located in Munich or some other place, right? That is many time zones away. Given the pace of television, it becomes impractical. Sure. To get that kind of ongoing input that you typically need in order to have in order to develop a project in the normal way. So there's a lot of impediments.
It's not necessarily a deal point, but it's something that should be discussed.
You just have to be prepared to understand that's just the way the American broadcast networks and major studios will work.
So with that, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask the panel? I think there's microphones.
Let's say you're a writer and you've got a really great idea and you're actually a very good writer and you've got a high concept idea, fully fleshed out, maybe even fully scripted. What would be the first step if you've never sold anything before? I know an agent is very helpful, but how would you go about getting an agent if you don't have a name?
I'll answer that. I mean, listen, that's not a format question, but I will answer this. In my experience, 99.9% of the time, networks and studios aren't buying ideas. They're buying ideas from people they know they want to be in business with, people that have done it, people that have a track record. I think to come in, you might be an excellent writer, the best in the history of writers, but if a network doesn't have a relationship with you that knows your writing, them investing the millions of dollars in a pilot or even whatever it might take to cost a script, it's a very unlikely situation. I think if you want to be selling your original ideas, you have to think about how you integrate yourself into the business as a writer on a staff, as someone who sort of works their way up to the business, so that the studio guys and gals who have been working with you sort of recognizes, you know what, you're a very talented writer. Do you have any original ideas? I think to come in from the outside and sell your show, you never say never, because weirder things have happened, but I would think it's not something that's
and also legally, for the studio point of view, it's coming from an agent.
We wouldn't take the pitch. It's all about, it is about auspices. I mean, if your great idea is about a bunch of people stranded on a desert island after an airplane crash, that's fabulous. It goes nowhere.
Right.
That idea brought in by J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof turns into Lost.
Right.
Thank you for your time. As I have incredible, remarkable content that is garnered a lot of interest in the industry here at NATPE, and we have a number of executive producers that are very eager to introduce this to networks and awaiting a marketable sizzle reel. But the question that you guys brought up about having a showrunner, if an agent loves the work and they're ready to bring it to the table, to your networks, and the content writer myself, our produced shows, we don't have a history of a writing name. Does the showrunner also take a percentage? How are points given to the writer if they're brought in addition to the original concept maker?
That's also not really a format question.
Yeah.
But yes, there are occasions where writers aren't the showrunner, and it's just a fresh new voice. Right. But those fresh new voices, and that's why there's people at ICM who make their living identifying those voices. And if they really spark to that voice and say, listen, this is a writer who isn't the showrunner. There are many writers who aren't showrunners, not just new voices in television, but well-respected voices in feature films who've never transferred over into television, and that's a completely different life. In which case, we're going to want an accepted, recognized showrunner in TV to be partnering with that person. And yes, in that partner process, there's going to be sharing of the goodies of the deal. There's no question that will, because that showrunner is going to be the 800-pound gorilla in that mix.
Right. Next question.
How do you see the scripted format changing with the advent internationally and domestic with Hulu, Netflix, and these kind of emerging online as well as mobile markets?
On our side, on the studio side, we are depending much more from the international sales because Netflix is killing the home video market.
Is doing what to the home video market?
Killing it.
Killing the home video market. That's an interesting discussion.
Lo está matando.
Está matando.
Go on.
So we sell less and less DVDs of our series. And of course, we have to go internationally much more stronger to get our deficit financing back.
But to answer, from my perspective, it complicates it. Because now you're not just dealing, for example, on issues of importation of the original format. Very often, from our perspective, we'll get questions not only of we would like to be able to license the original version, let's say, to PBS or BBC America. We want to put it on Hulu. We want to put it on mobile. You know, we want to exploit the original licensor would like to exploit in a variety of the digital platforms in the United States. Each one of those issues is going to be some form of a problem to an American network, and every different American network has its own culture about how much it cares about its exclusivity. I know ABC cares a great deal about its exclusivity.
I think ultimately you have to make a decision as a rights holder. What is your end goal? Do you want to be able to sort of maximize all of those rights, or do you want to be in business, or do you want to have the value of having your show at an ABC, which gives your format credibility in life in ways that maybe having it in Hulu or whatever it may be doesn't quite do for you. So I think those are the things you need to be thinking about as a rights holder.
By the way, I don't want to make this about Netflix, but I just was thinking back to what you said. I haven't seen any of the research. I know that very often our distribution people look at Netflix not as a.
I love Netflix. I have Netflix.
You have Netflix?
I'm an addict.
You love Netflix?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it could also be additive. If used in the right way, it's actually a very interesting additive level of monetization for studios.
I see it myself. I mean, I don't buy any more DVDs of TV series because they're there. They're on Netflix. Are you buying DVDs now?
I haven't bought a DVD in 3 or 4 years.
That's the thing.
That's a shame.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody else?
I'm just curious, how does an independent producer go about getting an opportunity to pitch a format to the studios?
Through the agents, first step.
Yeah.
And if not, you have to know someone there.
Okay, so basically you have to get an agent first, but then the agent won't take.
Well, the agent is always the easiest way to, reach studios and networks. I mean, they are going to know when they see your format, they're going to understand where is the best place to go, studios, networks, whatever. If you have, a contact in a studio or a network, you can go yourself. But I think agents are always a best way to go.
I think a lot of without trying to put words in anybody's mouth, I think the studios look at the agencies almost as like a filter.
Yeah.
And the content, if you will come to the agents. Agents will take a look at the content, and if it's great, then come up with a strategy as to where to take it next, how to properly package it and bring it and deliver it someplace so that set it up for the greatest amount of success it can enjoy. I think walking into a studio you'll probably be shown the door. Frankly, I don't see it happening.
You want credibility attached to your project.
Sure.
You want somebody who the studio or the network executives say, okay, I got a call from Raul or I got a call from Tybalt. He's brought us good things in the past. It may not be right for us, but at least it's worth having that conversation. So not that I'm pro agency, but there's also very good attorneys
Sure.
that have those relationships. There's managers, there's other people in the business, there's other producers that
Production
you can partner
companies.
with.
So there's a lot of different.
There's a lot of different
avenues.
ways.
I think the easiest and most obvious is an agency, but certainly managers, lawyers, production companies can also help get the foot in the door.
Executives ourselves. I mean, I went to Spain. I bought the rights of Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown that we are negotiating with ABC. That was my idea. So I didn't need an agent to do that job for me. I mean, I went there, I got the rights, and we developed the show for ABC. So a lot of ways. The easiest agents.
Anything else? I think we have time for one more question.
Good morning. I have a question. How often are you seeing people being picked up because of innovative content they've had on the web? Maybe they have a great web series and they're getting picked up that way, or have you seen that?
I think it's a question for you guys.
Yeah, it happens. It's starting to happen, I think, more and more as you're seeing a blurring of the lines in how content is being watched and delivered and in a sense, almost incubated. There are blogs that now are becoming, television shows. There are
Twitter
concepts.
feeds.
Sorry?
Twitter feeds. I mean, shit my
Sure,
dad says.
exactly.
On CBS.
Yeah,
It's
shit
a
my dad
television
says is
series.
the easiest example. But it's, as far as I personally haven't seen a foreign website, a foreign blog move into the American television market. I think the potential is there. I think it absolutely, if you have a very successful blog in Germany that's funny and humorous and would, can ultimately translate into a great half hour, I think absolutely you could do it that way. And I think eventually we will be moving more and more towards that. But as of right now, it's still early in the market.
But it's an interesting question. I mean, I think if you're a producer, if you're a writer, get your product made somehow and hope that somebody notices. There's a series that I'm producing out of Argentina called Ciegasitas. It started as a blog in Argentina. That blogger made a book deal with a publisher in Argentina. It became a book. TV producers bought it. They made a television series about it. Now I'm bringing it to the States. So, you know, it started as a blog, and it's sort of made this circuitous route throughout the world to land on my lap, and maybe we'll sell it, maybe we won't sell it, but you never know where these ideas are going to come from. And if you're a creative person, sometimes that's the best way to go. Anything else? Thank you to everyone. I really appreciate you coming down to Miami. I know that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, brutal.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming.